How many wars in American history can you name? The Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the two Iraq wars, Afghanistan, the new Iran one. But historians who track every recorded use of US military force abroad have counted nearly 400 separate interventions since 1776, roughly one every 7 months without stopping. And the question that number raises isn't, why does the US go to war so often? It's, why does everyone agree to call the gaps between the big ones peace? When most people think about American wars, they think in chapters, huge gaps in between, peace in between. That's the mental map. But that map is wrong, and the gap between the map and reality is enormous. The Military Intervention Project, which tracks every recorded use of US armed force abroad, contains nearly 400 interventions since 1776. In the first 170 years of the US's existence, 1776 to 1945, the US conducted roughly 90 of them. That's already a lot. It's one every 2 years, through periods most people would describe as peaceful. But since 1945, over 300 interventions in 80 years. That's more than one every 3 months, sustained across 8 decades. And the frequency is accelerating, not slowing down. Let's walk through what the peaceful interwar years actually look like on the ground. Haiti, Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, China, the Philippines, all active, all armed. The declared wars, the ones with names, account for 5 occasions in American history, 5 out of nearly 400 uses of military force. That roughly means 98.7% of all US military interventions happened without a formal declaration of war, without a vote, often without public knowledge. So when historians talk about peacetime America, what they actually mean is America between its named wars. The unnamed ones never stopped. And if you want to understand why, you have to stop thinking about this as a political choice and start thinking about it as a requirement. Here's the main argument I'm making in this video, and it's going to feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the ideological explanation almost completely. The United States doesn't intervene abroad because its leaders are hawks, or because its culture is militaristic, or because any particular party in power. It intervenes because it built a kind of economy that requires intervention to function. Let's think about what a commercial empire actually needs. Trade routes that stay open, ports that stay accessible, contracts that get enforced, debts that get paid. In a domestic economy, you can enforce contracts with courts and police. In an international economy, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, you enforce them with ships and marines. In 1832, US forces attack Kuala Batu in Sumatra. Why? Because a local ruler seized an American pepper trading ship. The response wasn't diplomatic, it was cannons. 6 years later, 1838, same place, same reason. Another American merchant ship, another attack, another naval response. 1851, and before I continue, I'm not listing all these off individually through all of time. These are just some random examples picked out of the list. The list is huge. 1851, a small island called Johanna, modern-day Anjouan, off the coast of Madagascar. The USS Dale sails in because the captain of an American whaling brig has been unlawfully imprisoned. They get him out. They leave. These aren't wars. They're not even close to wars. They're debt collection at gunpoint. They're the enforcement mechanism for a trading system that had no other enforcement mechanism. Smedley Butler, a US Marine Major General, one of the most decorated soldiers in American history, said it himself in 1935. He helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests, Haiti and Cuba safe for the National City Bank, Nicaragua safe for the international banking house of Brown Brothers. His words, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. And he wasn't exactly confessing to corruption. He was just describing what his job was, what the point of the system was. So once the United States became a trading nation with interests scattered across every ocean, it didn't choose to project force abroad. It inherited the obligation from the logic of the system it had built. The interventions weren't the policy. They were the maintenance of the policy. And maintenance, by definition, never ends. If you want to see this particular machine running at full speed ahead, the clearest example isn't a famous war. It's a period most Americans have never heard of. A stretch of about 40 years, roughly 1890 to 1934, when the US military occupied, invaded, or intervened in the Caribbean and Central American countries so frequently that historians eventually just gave it its own name, the Banana Wars. The name comes from the United Fruit Company, an American corporation that controlled vast agricultural territories across Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, and beyond. The United Fruit Company didn't just grow bananas, it owned railways, it owned ports, it owned the telegraph infrastructure. In some countries, it was effectively the government. When local governments tried to tax it, regulate it, or redistribute land from it, the company lobbied Washington, and Washington sent in the Marines. Haiti, occupied from 1915 to 1934. Nicaragua, occupied almost continuously from 1912 to 1933. The Dominican Republic, occupied from 1916 to 1924. These weren't brief interventions, they were whole administrations. The US wrote constitutions, ran custom houses, trained police, and crushed resistance movements. The resistance movements, the people fighting back, were labeled bandits. Their leaders were hunted, some were killed. Look at it from the other side for a second. The corporations needed stability to extract profit. Stability required suppressing any political movement that threatened extraction. Suppressing those movements required force. Force required justification. The justification was always protecting American lives and property. Each step in that chain makes a twisted kind of sense. I don't agree with it, but you can kind of see how they get there, right? Each step in that chain produces the next one almost automatically. The populations of these countries had no way to break the chain. Voting definitely did not work. Governments that won elections on reform platforms were removed. Protest didn't work. It was met with the police the US had trained. Exit didn't work. The economy had been restructured around export crops, so subsistence farming was no longer viable for most people. So the banana laws weren't a policy that went wrong, they were a policy that worked for the people it was designed to work for. The United Fruit Company kept extracting. The banks kept collecting. The Marines kept coming back. The people of Haiti, Nicaragua, and Honduras paid the bill in every currency that doesn't show up in a balance sheet. Eventually, the USA pulled back, admitting it shouldn't be doing this. When FDR announced the Good Neighbor policy in 1934, it didn't dismantle the system, it just changed the way of policing it. Here's what's most interesting to me about the nearly 400 interventions in the dataset. Justifications change completely across time, but the interventions keep happening at roughly the same rate, which tells you something important about what the justifications are actually doing. In the 19th century, the stated reason was almost always protecting American citizens and property abroad. Merchants, whalers, shipping companies. The language was commercial and explicit. After World War II, the language shifted almost entirely to ideology. Counter-communism, containing Soviet expansion, protecting the free world. The interventions in Vietnam, Laos, Guatemala, Iran, Congo, Chile, these were framed as battles in a global ideological struggle. And some of the people making those decisions genuinely believed that framing. But look at what the interventions were actually protecting. Oil infrastructure in Iran, copper mines in Chile, banana plantations in Guatemala. The pattern beneath the ideology is very consistent. After 9/11, the label shifted again, counter-terrorism. The 2001 authorization of use of military force, a single piece of legislation passed 3 days after the attacks, has been used to justify military operations in at least 24 countries. 24. The legal architecture changed, the label changed, the rate of interventions didn't. What this suggests, and this is the awkward part, is that the justifications aren't driving the interventions. The interventions are happening for other reasons, and the justifications are being selected to fit the political moment. Protecting commerce sounds too nakedly self-interested in 1960. Fighting communism sounds too Cold War in 2005. Fighting terrorism sounds exactly right in 2003. The label is chosen for its persuasive power in the here and now. The ideology isn't the engine, it's the output, the exhaust. The engine is the same one it's always been. A global commercial system that requires continuous force to function, and a state system that has for 225 years provided that force on demand. Which brings us to the question the dataset can't fully answer, but that the pattern strongly implies. If nearly 400 military interventions over 225 years seems like a lot, and it is, the obvious question is, why hasn't the democratic process stopped it? Why hasn't Congress or the public or the press pushed back hard enough to break the pattern? The short answer is that the system was designed piece by piece to make that very difficult. Let's start with the legal architecture. The US has officially declared war 5 times in its history. 5. Every other intervention has been justified through a different mechanism. Specific laws, standing authorizations, treaty obligations, UN resolutions, or presidential executive authority. The War Powers Resolution of 1973, passed specifically to limit presidential war-making after Vietnam, has never successfully stopped a single intervention. Presidents report to Congress. Congress grumbles. The operation continues. The 2001 AUMF is the clearest example of a standing authorization that became effectively permanent. It was written to target Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. It has been stretched to cover operations in Somalia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Niger, and at least 17 other countries. No new vote or law required. Then there's the visibility problem, the interventions that drive the pattern. The small ones, the drone strikes, the special forces deployments, the naval shows of force, are almost entirely invisible to the public. They don't generate casualty counts. They don't generate many news cycles. They generate nothing except a line in a dataset that most people will never read. The Nuku Hiva campaign of 1813, the Johanna Island intervention of 1851, the occupation of Dutch Guiana in 1941, specifically to protect bauxite mines supplying American aluminium production. These happened. They're documented and almost nobody knows about them. And that invisibility is not an accident. Low visibility operations don't generate the political pressure that might trigger oversight. No pressure, no correction. No correction, no change. The corporations and financial interests that benefit from intervention have every incentive to maintain access to the political process. The populations of intervened countries have no access to that process at all. It all runs in one direction. The system continues to exist not because it's hidden from democracy, but because it operates in the spaces American democracy was never been designed to reach. The grey zones between declared war and acknowledged peace, where force is used but never named. The accountability is nearly impossible. And that pattern, that gap between what's declared and what actually happens, has a cost that keeps growing. So let's see where we land. Not on a moral verdict, on a simple answer. The United States has been at war, in the full operational sense of that word, every single year since 1798. Not because of hawks and doves, not because of Republicans or Democrats, not because of any ideology that could, in theory, be voted out, but because of a structural reality that has never changed. A commercial empire with interests distributed across every ocean requires continuous force to protect those interests. And once the architecture is in place, the interventions become almost automatic. The countries on the receiving end of this didn't get to vote on whether they wanted to be part of it. She didn't vote for 19 years of American occupation. Guatemala did not vote for the CIA-backed coup that removed its elected president in 1954. The families working the bauxite mines in Dutch Guiana in 1941 didn't vote for American soldiers to arrive and secure the perimeter. Each of those interventions made sense within its own logic. Each of them produced costs, though. Political instability, institutional damage, the suppression of the local governance. That compounded across decades. The instability that characterizes much of Central America today, the political fragility of Haiti, the difficulty of building durable institutions in countries that were administered from outside for generations. These are not accidents. They are the long-term receipts for short-term maintenance. And the system that produced them is still running. The justification has changed. It's counterterrorism now or great power competition, but the rate is the same. More than one intervention every 3 months, sustained without interruption. The question, should the US be the world's policeman, is the wrong question. The US isn't necessarily acting as a policeman. In theory, a policeman enforces neutral rules. What the dataset shows is something more specific, the cost of enforcing the conditions of its own commercial system on the rest of the world. That's not necessarily policing, but it is maintenance. Once a country builds an economy that depends on open global trade routes, and once it requires the military capacity to protect those routes, the interventions don't require a decision, they require an invoice. A decision was made 2 centuries ago, the first time an American merchant ship sailed beyond American waters and expected to come home safely. Peacetime was never the default, it was always the exception, and a rare one at that. And if you believe that argument, and I'd say 400 plus entries up until 2009 is a pretty convincing case, then it's worth drilling into one of the more recent wars and finding out the reasons, mostly structural, that led to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, why the US felt it had no choice but to invade, occupy, and ultimately ruin a country and region. If that sounds like your vibe, take a look at this. And also, if you like this and you want to see more, give me a like and subscribe, maybe even a hype, who knows. Bye. August, a US, one of nearly 400 military, here we go. Smedley Butler, a US Marine major, I helped purify Nicaragua. The ideology,